Thank you so much for inviting. Maurice, I cannot beat you with that last slide, of course, from your daughter. Um, um, the review of 2-year intervals, or we phrase it in considerations in selecting biannual or annual CT screening intervals. And I could make it very brief and sit down in 1 minute, because there is not a randomized controlled trial that has a 2-year interval versus a 1-year interval. There are 2 big randomized controlled trials, and they used 1-year intervals and one plus interval or so, as you know, the Nelson trial with a 1 year, 2 year, and 2.5 years interval. So it's not that easy, maybe. Let's see when it works. Where should I point? Yeah. So one could argue that biannual screening is simply favorable if the costs for CT screening are high, if you have limited capacity to screen, if you may have a preference for including also moderate risk individuals, so a larger group, let's say, and the advantage may be that you can personalize your screening interval to annual for those at the highest risk, for instance, looking at the previous scan. But of course, annual screens are favorable if the cost of CT screening are not that high, are low. If the cost of late-stage treatments are quite high. If you want to focus on the individuals at the highest risk of lung cancer, and if you, of course, have a clear-cut preference for realizing the maximum lung cancer mortality reduction. We do know a lot, actually. So from the big trials, from the big running studies nowadays, of course, for sure, but let's say in the first analysis we did, we of course looked a lot at the randomized controlled trials. So the first recommendations we did for the US Preventive Services Task Force are from 2013, and we used the NLST data. And with that kind of data, you really, as I explained a little bit yesterday already, you can really come up with estimates of sensitivity by histology, by age of the test being used or the tests being used. Compare that to, for instance, the underlying background instance without any screening program, and then you can have a best estimate of the natural history of the disease by stage and by age, etc., etc. And if you use that to come up then with cost-effective strategies, this is what we published and presented to the US Preventive Services Task Force. And to give you a bit of an idea, on the x-axis, it is, in this case, the number of screens per 100,000 individuals. So the more to the right, the more screens you do. And on the y-axis, in this case, is lung cancer mortality reduction you achieve here as a percentage. And this line is a so-called efficient frontier. What it means is that given a certain amount of, let's see whether it works. Does it work? What should I do? Oh, sorry, no, that's not working, of course. How should I pinpoint to something? Yeah, but I tried that, the top button, huh? Yeah, but then it's, you see, then it's, I have to go back one back. Yeah, thanks. You do something else than I do. What? The top button. Yeah, I did that. But okay, I'll tell you the story. I'll tell you the story about the coffee machine at my office in maybe later on. I do the same thing with my finger. So there's something with my finger. But one more time. Yeah, thanks so much. So on the y-axis, the lung cancer mortality rate. This is efficient frontier. It basically means that if you have enough money or you have enough screens to do this, this is the best policy that you get. There are policies under this line that you should not do, because given the same amount of cost or given the same amount of screens, you get less effects. That's what the efficient frontier basically means. And what this curve basically shows that the biannual screening programs are even not presented here. The biannual programs are here on the left-hand side. They're not on this one. That indeed you can come up with efficient strategies that start with biannual screening, but you see what we presented basically was almost all annual between 60 and 80 years old, 40 pack years, quit smoking 25 years, and you go on to the right to make it more a more increased, let's say, a more intensive program. And at that point in time, you see the yellow square. We basically said annual screening between 55 and 80, 30 pack years, and stopped smoking in the last 15 years is a cost-effective policy, and the task force came out with that in the first time, of course. So yes, you can, with all this kind of data, come up with a bit of estimates on annual or biannual screening. This is then the analysis later on for the US Preventive Task Force. Again, this is then the Erasmus model that we use at our office, let's say. But these recommendations have been done by the so-called CISNET modeling group on lung cancer screening, and that's in fact the Erasmus together with some 4 to 5 American groups of modelers, let's say, or I should maybe rephrase that, American groups of modelers with the Erasmus. But here in 2021 published, we made a new analysis, and again, you see this efficient frontier. And again, if you look at the colors, here you see the colors of annual. So basically these a little bit, these more, what is it, the more, how should I say, bright yellow, I don't know, orange. These are the annual screens, and the biannual programs are a little bit further down this efficient frontier. So basically, again, saying, yeah, you see, probably you should go for annual that is more cost effective, it's more close to the efficient frontier. At that point in time, given the low attendance rate in the US, the low coverage in general, the US Preventive Task Force broadened their inclusion to go to 20 pack years rather than 30 pack years because we basically had enough capacity on the one hand, and we would then have a bit more equity, if I'm still allowed to say that word, and to include black Americans. We did an analysis for Switzerland, in which the cost of CT screening were rather high. We used the 420 euros. And the slide itself becomes a little bit more difficult, but again, I give you a bit of idea that now these are all annual ones on this red line, and this is biannual on this blue line. And they are not so far from each other, actually, given the high cost of CT scanning. So in fact, in this case, if the cost of CT screening is a lot, actually maybe biannual screenings to a large extent, here you see up till this period up till these screens or so, they are quite close. And you could maybe even go for biannual screening, although until that time, we often said, given the natural history of disease, given the data from the randomized controlled trials, annual screening would probably be preferable. And now this sensitivity of the CT scan itself becomes an important issue, of course. This is analysis we've done both with the NLST data, the Nelson data, and actually here are also the sensitivities of the chest X-ray if you still want to see them. But basically here you see sensitivities, for instance, for adenocarcinoma in the NLST data and in the Nelson data. And here you see for adenocarcinoma stage 1A, we have sensitivity in the order of 50 to 60%. But why I'm showing you this is that, in fact, these were the NLST data, and we basically see that the Nelson data are, here you just see the adenocarcinoma, but even a little bit better, actually. So with increasing higher sensitivity of the CT scan, again, you could say, okay, then biannual screening could just be fine because our sensitivity is so much better than we basically had seen in the randomized controlled trials. So this may basically to show you a little bit that there's not yet a fixed answer. But I will go a little bit further. This is now the most recent data we're working on. That's a cost effectiveness data for the Netherlands, where we basically use both NLST and Nelson data. Please don't use these data yet, so that we can still try to publish that. All my credits go to my modeling team, of course, Koen de Nijs, who's a PhD student, and Kevin ten Haaf. But here now you see that with the low cost of CT scanning in the Netherlands, probably maybe 180 euros or so, and at the same time a high relative cost of late-stage treatment, these are the newest data on the cost of late-stage treatment in the Netherlands, where this enormous change in immunotherapy and the cost, etc., makes actually now, we think, here on the top, here on the top again, these are all annual strategies, and here are the biannual strategies. And this is now certainly, I would say, much more different. So with low cost of CT scanning, with low cost of CT scanning and this increasing cost of late-stage treatment, we see actually that maybe, again, annual screens are the way forward. Can we personalize that? Of course, that is, of course, the next question. We should personalize that. And as you know, the 4 in the long run trial, there we really want to see whether we can still remain the benefits of annual screening while reduce the burdens of biannual screening. So in all sorts of different ways, we get people in this trial. We started with a very high risk age risk group, 60 to 79, 35 PEC years or more, the POCM risk of 2.6% and higher. So that's a very high risk group, but that has all to do, of course, with power of this trial. And basically we have randomized individuals that if their baseline scan is negative, can we go to an annual screening or a biannual screening? And I think we need this kind of evidence at the end to personalize the program. So the considerations at the moment, I would say on the left hand, you see the annual. Yeah, why annual? Highest benefit, of course, and you can prevent expensive late-stage treatment. Why biannual? Well, of course, if your CT, let's say, capacity is a little bit lower in your country, maybe biannual would be the way forward, and it can allow a somewhat broader inclusion of moderate risk individuals. But we hope, I would say at the moment, we have a lot of evidence to go for annual and then hopefully personalize that. But for that, we do require, of course, the correct follow-up protocols. We do require randomized controlled trial evidence, and with maybe AI or biomarkers, we can even personalize it even more. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think we have 2 minutes for questions on this very, very interesting talk, and thanks for sharing unpublished data.
Thank you. Please.
Nobody takes photographs.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
We're very involved with the modeling effort from NLST. And one of the things that you didn't show from the models, you had that column on number needed to be screened, which was, I thought, really, in fact, to me, that was the most informative for this topic. And you show with the different protocols, age starting, but basically I often use that slide. And for annual, the number needed to screen is typically somewhere in the 40 something people to 60, 40 to 60 for annual, and for biannual, it's 50 to 70 number of people needed to be screened to save one life, to 80, whatever. It's really a pretty substantial, it's a significant, improvement. So the biannual, yeah, you need to screen more people. It wasn't double the amount, but it was, I thought it was a pretty decent number, in terms of, its effectiveness. So I think what you're saying, it makes a lot of sense. The idea that, in places where you just don't have the capacity to do it, biannual does pretty good. It's not like you need to screen, hundreds of people to save a life. It's, less than double the amount.
Yeah, I agree. So when we did the first analysis task force, we basically came out with annual screens, whereas at that moment the UK had already started with the target lung health checks with the 2-year interval. So they were sort of anxious on what did you say. Given the natural history, you would still say indeed rapid growth for many of the histologies. So we need the annual ones. But you're right. For instance, if your CT scan is so sensitive, and you, for instance, don't have that much capacity, then biannual is quite interesting. But surely we really hope that we can personalize it and even have some 3-year intervals for some individuals, whereas we maybe need the 6 months for some others. But we're not there yet, I guess. Yeah.
Very quick question from Lewis, and then we have to move on.
Yeah, thank you, Harry. Over here. So I have a question about adjuvant therapy in early stage disease. Obviously, EGFR inhibitors are coming to early stage and immunotherapy as well. And, we're looking at 2 years of immunotherapy for early stage disease. Have you taken that into account in your modeling, or will you in the future?
So we will certainly do that in the future. We really looked at the most recent data that we could have, which was like 2 years ago or so. So we still probably don't have that so much in the data. If it was there, it is being included. But basically what we see, we had a certain level, of course, of costing, and that increased with 50% in the Netherlands, as in many countries. And that now really has this impact. Even more than we had thought of. So probably not yet included it yet. No.
Yeah. Just a final comment. Harry, in light of the fact that yesterday we saw from the 25-year follow-up that far and away cardiovascular disease, the biggest cause of death, next parenchymal lung disease, next lung cancer. Don't we have to do all these modeling things for frequency as a function of the totality of tobacco-related disease?
Yes, fully agree with that. Fully agree with that. What would that in this case mean? It would probably mean it does mean in the cost effectiveness and the efficient frontiers for sure, becoming even more cost effective. In principle, I mean, I have always been a bit hesitant to say that lung cancer screening will be cost effective, in the sense that it is costly. It's a CT scanning. It's not like mammography. It's not like a smear. It's not like a fit test. And still, what we now see, it can be a cost-effective program. Let's be clear about that, even without including cardiovascular stuff. I think the cardiovascular would probably not make much considerations in this aspect about annual, biannual. But I agree, we should take it into account in the future. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I have to stop that heated discussion, and please do it in the coffee break. But that really is a hot topic which needs to be discussed further. And I would like thank you.